Hello, everybody. It's Merlin the Mighty here. I'm here for another MerlinCast, the Merlin the Mighty podcast. It's been a while. For those of you that might not have seen in my update video, I just kind of said that I'd taken a little bit of a hiatus and I kind of need a break, but now I'm back. And I'm in a new place, if anybody notices. Kind of had a bit of a transition there. And I figured, I had a bit of a detailed schedule for this thing sort of set up in this podcast, but had to divert a little bit. Hopefully I'll have some guest co-hosts and other people that'll be joining me in the following weeks and months. Got to arrange that with some people. We'll have different kinds of discussions, reactions to news items and whatnot. But I thought I'd just kind of, try this one out, keep it kind of brief with just some catch up on some reviews of recent things that I'd watched. The first thing, I thought of something else I could talk about too. As I'm thinking about, there's something else I can talk about. There you go. It's one of those things that completely skipped my mind. But first thing I wanted to talk about is Game of Thrones Season 7. I don't really talk about Game of Thrones too much. It's kind of one of those things that's just so much to talk about. I feel like I'd have to kind of tackle the whole thing and really detail it. There's just so much. But just want to kind of to give my brief thoughts on Season 7. I just thought that it was honestly... I remember thinking the first couple episodes of the season I was watching it, and it just seemed like even in Season 7 they were still building things up between Daenerys and Jon meeting up and the different alliances crossing over, and it just kind of felt like, okay, this is building, and nothing... I felt like the first couple episodes nothing really happened, which is kind of like this little joke I kind of have in the back of my mind that Game of Thrones is one of those things that probably could have ended a long time ago, but then they decided to do the logical thing, which we kind of mentioned as we were watching it, that go get one of these undead walkers and show it to Cersei, and then she'll believe you, and then everybody can unite and tackle everything. There might be some minor spoilers here, but I try to keep it relatively spoiler-free. But that is like the main mission, and I'll say right now that was probably my favorite episode, actually, because I remember watching Jon and everybody else go up there, with the Hound. It's just like this group of badass characters going up into the north, into this frozen wilderness to go search to find this undead being they can take back, and at the same time avoid this entire army, and then get surrounded and have to battle with them. I thought that whole sequence, that whole section was just like straight D&D. It really was, for one of the few times. Actually, it's the only time I can really think of where it just feels like you've got a quest for these characters. They have an actual party on a campaign, and it was pretty cool. I kind of wish the show had a bit more of that sometimes, because as much as I like the political stuff and the intrigue, sometimes I just think that those fantasy elements are actually kind of hindered a little bit. They're a bit suppressed, and I think it's kind of unfortunate. But that episode was awesome. The twist, with some of the people we lost in the season. I mean, the one dragon, going down and getting turned into the servant for the Night King was pretty awesome. He became the ice-breathing dragon, pretty much took down the wall. That was really awesome. It was like, oh man, how are they going to beat that now? But of course, Jon and Daenerys finally uniting, and the way that season wraps up, with their particular relationship. I mean, it's kind of one of those things that it's Game of Thrones. You saw it was going to happen, even though a lot of people know what's going on in the books, and that's revealed that they're related later. It's like, okay, but I like how people kind of turn a blind eye to that whole thing, even though I guess it's because the evil people do it. The incest thing's even worse. But there was that. I think some characters kind of got pushed back a little bit. I like Tyrion obviously, but I feel like he didn't get to shine quite as much this time around. But I did like that episode a lot. I really liked Sam. Kind of treating the grayscale disease by basically just cutting it really finely. That was probably my most memorable scene from the show, because the special effects to show the grayscale and to show him cutting through it. Obviously it's fake, but that was probably for the show that is as gory as it is. They're always trying to top themselves in terms of that, I think, with each season. And the detail of that makeup and those prosthetics, combined with the acting for that scene, was just they really got you with the gore. It was just gross. They made it really gross. And there was that transition, that little mean joke where he's cutting into him, and then like it looks like something cracks, like he broke through the skin, and all this pus breaks out, but it's just like somebody biting into like something else in another scene. I was like, oh man, that's that was a cruel joke, but that was a great transition and just great effects in general, for sure. So yeah, that was pretty cool. The other thing I thought was really memorable about it was actually the last episode. I think the biggest, most monumental thing for me, and probably for a lot of people watching, was, spoilers once again, the death of Littlefinger, Peter Baelish, because this guy, he's kind of like the sniveling guy behind the shadows, cloak and dagger, and I guess I never really thought about it. Like, I guess maybe it was kind of obvious, but it was just completely revealed and stated 100% at this point that he was responsible for everything. What happened to Ned in the first season, trying to pit the houses against each other, and that basically the whole series and all the events that have transpired are basically his fault. It all comes back to him, and he's trying to turn the sisters against each other, and Sansa and Arya kind of like, they get him up at the court, and they're thinking that Sansa's going to put her on trial, but then she's like, you stand accused of murder and treason, Baelish, and then he's just kind of like, wait, what? Like, he does a double take, and it's like he does exactly what the audience probably does. Like, no one saw that coming, because I was convinced they did a really good job of hiding that, which is like, at what point did they confer? But I guess they were suggesting that the bond between the sisters was so strong that even though they've spent some time away from each other and they've changed to some extent, that they still are trusting of each other enough. And just him getting his comeuppance and him just getting taken down, that was the most monumental death. And to be honest, I remember watching this season, watching the girlfriend, we kept kind of making fun, like, what's your end game? What's his plan? What's his motivation? Because I think in a season or two ago, he said he wanted to sit on the Iron Throne, and like, even when he said that, I didn't believe that. I thought that motivation for him was weird, because he's really comfortable behind the shadows, not really with all the attention focused on him. So I think he just kind of liked to revel in the chaos and turning people against each other. And of course, maybe he did, love Sansa and her mother in his own way, but he was. I'm not saying he never did anything good, but for the most part, everything he did was motivated by his own actions. So overall, though, that big fake out where I thought that Jaime and his buddy and the dragon and Daenerys and like everybody in that battle might die. That was another cool moment. And then it was like, oh man, that one, just when I think that I'm not that invested in Game of Thrones, they have these episodes. And I'll say that even if you're not a big fan, I have one friend of mine who doesn't really like it because it isn't really much of the high adventure stuff. But this season has the most combat, the most war, the most all-out adventure stuff, the most fantasy elements. You got dragons and undead beings and weird white ghost magicians and the giants back there still. There's like everything here. If you like high fantasy, we're finally getting to it. I think there's only like 6 episodes in the second part of the season or something. So, there's still. I just feel like it's going to be kind of rushed. Like they seem like they were going to suggest that Cersei was finally going to grow as a character a bit and not be evil, but unfortunately it looked like that was a bit of a ruse too, unfortunately. But yeah, overall though, I thought the season was actually really good. I've always enjoyed Game of Thrones quite a bit. I've still been watching it up to this point, but I remember within the last season or so I was kind of feeling like it's dragging out, but finally the big stuff's starting to happen, and then before you know it's going to be over. I think it's kind of annoying that we have to wait like a year and a half until the final couple episodes, basically. But I guess they want to keep hyping it up and getting as much out of the franchise for the moment. But yeah, that's season 7 Game of Thrones from my perspective. I thought it was pretty good. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Some really good episodes. If you guys watch it, what are some highlights you guys like? Some theories you have? I'd like to hear what you guys have to think about that one. But moving on here, another show that I don't talk about too much that also has had a season going on, I think they've had a break recently, has been Rick and Morty. I really, really enjoy Rick and Morty. Rick and Morty is definitely one of my favorite shows, probably my favorite animated show in the past couple of years. It's one of those things where people kind of told me about it, they kind of recommended it to me. I watched like a few episodes, I thought it was fun, but it's one of those things that if you only watch like a couple episodes really sporadically, you can't really get a full sense of what the show's about, because even though it is pretty episodic, there is still a pretty solid arc for the characters, and there are some references to other events, and you get pretty absorbed into it. And I went I think about a year or so ago. I actually finally started watching everything and got caught up, and really loved the first two seasons. I mean, I think that Meeseeks is still probably my favorite episode from season one, but as far as this new season goes, I mean, it's been for the most part really good. I mean, there's the stuff they advertised, and I think it's mostly topped itself. I mean, I thought the Mad Max episode was pretty decent. I think Pickle Rick though is really the one that's really taken the cake for the most part. I mean, in terms of the gore, in terms of the violence, and just the dynamic between Rick and Beth and Morty and Summer and everybody there in the therapy's office. As Susan Sarandon was the voice actress there, guest starring. A lot of big actors they've been getting in and to fill these roles for the season. I thought that's pretty awesome. The popularity of Rick and Morty, and I mean I find it interesting how it's probably like one of the most nihilistic shows in pop culture right now, but it still manages to be so fun. And I don't know if there is any way it could end with a happy ending. You know, I don't think that. I don't think that would really be in spirit with the show, but at the same time, I like these characters so much that I hope it doesn't go too dark. They've got Jerry still out now, with Beth kind of throwing him out, and his episode with Rick was actually pretty decent. I think the weakest one actually was probably the one where they separated the bad elements from themselves, and I thought it was an interesting concept where they separate the negative aspects of their personalities, but without those aspects, they aren't really who they are as people. And I thought there were some interesting things that happened there, but it was kind of I think it was a little bit of an underdeveloped idea. What the heck happened here? Oh, okay. That was really weird. My screen went out. But yeah, I think there were some underdeveloped ideas a little bit there. Like I think that maybe the evil versions could have like wreaked havoc or something. There definitely were. One person made a comment that there were basically no repercussions for what happened in the episode. Like everything gets kind of undone, but then there's that one like clown or at the party that got murdered by those kids that didn't get fixed, But it was kind of almost an episode that you could say it almost could be thrown aside. But on the whole, I really like Rick and Morty. I think it's one of those shows where I like every single character. I think they're all well written. I think it's funny. I think it's interesting. There's a lot of good references to sci-fi and horror in there, just all throughout the show. There was even an episode I think a few seasons ago where it was literally like David Cronenberg completely. Oh, excuse me. Oh man. Oh, But yeah, so far Rick and Morty is doing pretty well. I'm kind of curious to see where the season goes. I don't know if they can really top themselves, because I kind of almost get the sense that this is one of those shows that even though they joke about there being many more seasons, that I really feel like they take their time writing these episodes and they really pump out the best content that they can. But I just feel like it's been so good that they can't keep it as uniform for this long. I kind of worry about it lasting much longer than a season or two more, to be completely honest. But overall, though, Rick and Morty's pretty awesome. I think Morty's character development's getting really interesting. He's getting really evil. The superhero episode too was kind of an awesome one for me, making fun of all those aspects and showing that all those superheroes are pretty evil with Christian Slater. That was pretty great. But been a really good season so far, honestly. I'm hoping it continues to be good. And I don't think they're going to wrap it up this season, but I feel like they might do one more, and that might be it. I think that would be the recommended way to go. But moving on to, I think, probably the biggest thing I could say was anticipated for me this past month was The Defenders. Finally culminated with the Netflix Daredevil, other Marvel Universe, the smaller one, the street level heroes. Oh, man. I guess just as a quick recap about how I feel about the Daredevil shows and the Netflix Marvel shows, I kind of want to do a video just kind of on them in general. Like, I kind of want to go back and talk about some of that stuff because I haven't in too much depth, really. But in summation, Daredevil is like one of my favorite superheroes. I think that the Daredevil show did him justice really well, far better than the Ben Affleck movie, even though I do kind of like that one. It's probably the best. I like both seasons a lot. I actually think I might prefer season. I don't know. I think I prefer season one a little bit more for Daredevil because it is mostly focused on him, and you have the Kingpin as a really dynamic character as well. And the way they did Wilson Fisk, even though it was a little different than how he is in the comics, I think was still really awesome for the most part. And just that cold demeanor, like Wilson Fisk is, I mean, I guess it's no surprise the Kingpin would be. He's kind of got a lot of leverage there as a Marvel villain, but he's probably the best villain thus far. Some people might argue that, but no, I thought Daredevil season 1 was really good. Season 2, I think you could say plot-wise it's better. There's certainly a lot more action in it, and the Punisher, plays a big role. But I kind of would argue that for a Daredevil series, I know they're kind of using it to introduce Punisher, but I feel like that takes away a little bit from his focus. And that season kind of felt like two different shows. Like they had the Punisher storyline, which is kind of interwoven, but not really, and then it sort of fizzles out. And then you've got the whole Elektra hand stuff, which is kind of building up to later things, but also I think isn't quite as fully stretched out. Like I think they're still excellent, but I felt like they were trying to balance two different things there, for sure. But I think overall Daredevil's probably my favorite. I think it's probably the best written overall. Very good. Jessica Jones, honestly, I'm not like a huge fan of her from the comics. I know a little bit about her, but her show was really good too. I think very different. I mean, still had the mystery noir element, but I think a lot of these Netflix shows kind of are really trying to focus on really gritty, mature, adult-oriented topics that aren't always easy. And obviously with Jessica Jones, you've got the whole stalker domination, men versus women, the evil force, and you've got the rape and invasion aspect, which is very uncomfortable. I mean, I think that honestly, Kilgrave, the Purple Man, also literally pretty much the evilest character in comics, at least Marvel. Like, I mean, he might not be the most powerful, but I mean, he literally uses his aura to manipulate, and essentially he rapes people. He literally, both metaphorically and literally, does it in the comics, and he basically does that in the show. He goes beyond that. He really messes with people's minds and their bodies. Just a complete invasion. But really, really good villain too, for sure. I mean, I think some people might argue he's better than Wilson Fisk. I don't know. I think he's not quite as developed. I might have to watch it again, but he seemed like they kind of left some of his motivations to be a bit of a mystery. But still, if we're talking about comparing the Netflix villains to the Marvel Cinematic villains, I mean, there's still basically no comparison. But no, Kilgrave was really good, honestly, really, really good too. Jessica Jones, I think, overall, her story was also pretty good as well. I think some people might not think she's quite as likable of a character. Like, it got a little bit annoying later where she just continues to do the annoying, like, tough girl thing where it's like she never lets anybody in. And I know that's her character, but I almost kind of wish she'd loosen up a little, and we talk a little bit about that later. But I'm basically just talking about all the Daredevil, the Netflix shows now. But anyway, Luke Cage. Luke Cage is probably my favorite character. Honestly, I think he's my favorite character of all these shows. But his show was really like all the other shows, but I think even more so his was really atmospheric to make you feel like you're there in Harlem, and you've got all the hip hop and jazz and R&B influences. You've got the style. Everything kind of has like this 70s retro feel, even though it's kind of modern. I think the biggest issue with that show, though, is kind of that there are just too many villains. I mean, you had Cottonmouth, and you had the mayoral lady, and then you had, was it Diamondback, and you had like 3 different villains there, and they're all pretty good villains, actually, and I guess they're all kind of connected, but like they build up one, he's kind of like a false villain. I really liked him a lot, and then you kind of had her as a secondary villain. Then I guess you got Shades too. You got so many villains, so many different things going on, and Luke Cage is just kind of bouncing around. And then it seems like it's almost like an anime where they had like the pre-villain and they had the boss, or like the Buffy metaphor. You got the little bad, big bad, but they did that a couple times, at like these different subordinates, and then it finally led up to the main villain. And don't get me wrong, I thought he was really evil and interesting, but he was there too quickly, and he was gone too quickly, and he wasn't he even though he was interesting and had a cool motivation, not as fleshed out as the other villains, I thought. And his last final fight scene with Luke Cage was just not that impressive, and his costume was silly, really silly. I know it's comic book stuff, but considering they're trying to go for the gritty, realistic stuff, no, I don't think it really compared. But then that gets us to Iron Fist, and I really, Iron, going into all these other shows, I really loved. I loved Daredevil. Really liked Jessica Jones. Really liked Luke Cage. Really think they're all very good shows. And then I come to Iron Fist, and I'm just kind of like, I kind of have to do a double take. Like, what is happening? Like, it just, I know there are people, there are a handful of people I know about and have met that really like the Iron Fist character and like his show. But I really think if you compare them, it's kind of hard to ignore the dip in quality here. I mean, like, I'm sorry, like, it's not, like, I do think that it's interesting enough of a story that you kind of want to see what's going on, but it kind of drags out from getting to any real superhero stuff. And the acting is just really bad. Like, I'm sorry, but like it's either really campy or just kind of bad and weak, and the direction's all over the place. And I mean, I guess it's kind of like sort of laughably entertaining, but it's just like the level of quality is like you've got the other stuff which is up here, and then Iron Fist is like right down here. Like, it's hard to believe it's the same universe. I mean, the different writers, different directors, I guess, but I mean, I think there were good elements to it. Like, I did find the story kind of interesting, but the pacing was weird. Once again, too many villains. Acting was really weird, not that great, and inconsistent. Like, some of the villains weren't really that intimidating. It was just something else entirely. Iron Fist wasn't that great, and I thought that the Danny Rand character wasn't really that interesting. And for a lot of people that saw Arrow, I mean, it's a very similar character. But as far as I guess the racial stuff was an issue. I don't believe he, was always that way in the comics. I mean, it kind of follows the standard kung fu idea where you've got the young American guy learning from the Asian experts, but it's not that uncommon. I mean, there were so many other Asian influences in it, I thought it was fine. I mean, Marvel's tried to be pretty inclusive with these things, but that was, I think, the least of the issues. I did kind of like Faramir as one of the main villains early on. I thought that was kind of cool, but I don't know. I'll be honest, I couldn't really even get through Iron Fist. I think I watched I think I watched about half of it, and I just couldn't do it. I thought it was just too bad. Honestly, I'm sorry I did. And maybe that's one reason why I didn't fully appreciate Defenders. But I felt like I had to watch Defenders, and I have to say, I found Defenders to be kind of disappointing. And I don't know if that's an uncommon opinion. I've noticed that reviews still rank it pretty highly, but it's definitely not as high as any of the other shows. And I guess you could kind of compare it to the Avengers, where the Avengers is something that I have a mixed feeling about, just to get sidelined a little bit briefly as a comparison. I really like the Avengers. I think it's a great culmination of like a crossover comic book story, for sure. You get all the characters that have been established in other things, but you don't really need to know that to enjoy the movie, but it definitely enhances it, which has been the Marvel formula. I feel like with the Defenders, they try to do the same thing, but oddly enough, even though it's a show, they try to do too much with their storyline, and it feels like it's uneven and underdeveloped. Like, Sigourney Weaver was a cool villain, except that her motivations were kind of unclear, and the motivations of the Hand kind of varied a lot too. And so there were just a bunch of issues, I thought, with that, to be completely honest. That was one issue I had with it. And I thought that the characters getting to interact was really cool, but I honestly think we could have had a little more time with them really interacting, because they kind of shift their characterizations pretty quickly. Like, Jessica's like, man, I don't want to do this, and then she's like, I do want to do this, and I felt like it was just too easy, and I know that Luke Cage and Iron Fist are buddies in the comics. They're partners, they really are, with the Heroes for Hire, and I feel like their bond wasn't quite well executed either. Like, they could have done more with that. I think the most interesting stuff is the Daredevil Elektra stuff, but even that was kind of a little bit rushed. The motivations of the Hand were a bit rushed. The acting wasn't as strong in this one. The directing was really off too. I think with the cinematography, like the camera angles, a lot of weird angles, a lot of shaky cam, and not the best lighting. I know I'm not saying it's terrible, but in comparison to the other shows, which have mostly been great, that was an issue. And I'm sorry. I think for Iron Fist fans, it was probably great, but the fact that Iron Fist, being the plot point and main centerpiece of the plot itself, was kind of irritating. And still, even after all this, Danny is still complaining, still unsure of himself for much of it. He gets his butt kicked by Elektra pretty bad. You know, I mean, I know she's supposed to be awesome, but she's never been that awesome as far as I can recall. And he gets captured. He gets captured and has to be saved. That's the main crux that brings everybody together, is one of the Defenders, my least favorite, and honestly the weakest link in the series, I think, gets captured. It's just not that impressive. And, you know, it bothers me. It bothers me. Oh, man, it really does. Oh, gosh, that's rough. But yeah, and also another thing, I will admit, okay, the story being a bit rushed, that's kind of understandable, like with the Avengers, we just want to see the action. I kind of felt like the action wasn't as good as in other series. I mean, especially Daredevil. Like, people were saying to me, oh man, the fight scene, I guess at the end, the final fight scene with the Hand, man, that's going to beat out the hallway fight scene from Daredevil Season 1. Not really. Like, even if you go from the basic camera work perspective, where they try to kind of keep it as one continuous shot going up and down the stairs, they tried to do something similar, but it wasn't quite as effective, mostly because the stunt work wasn't as good. I mean, I find it hard to believe you could look at both those scenes side by side and not know which one is better executed. I don't know. I think people were really hyped up by it, but I did notice that people weren't quite as crazy about it as I think they thought they were going to be. I heard some people kind of had mixed feelings about it. You know, when I was finishing up the show, I kind of got some opinions too, but I think it was all right, but I think there was definitely a lack of some underdeveloped potential there for sure. And I hope they do more stuff. Like, I'm looking forward to the new Daredevil season, and I'm looking forward to Punisher stuff and more things. But I definitely feel like there's more they could do there. But yeah, so Defenders is okay. And then I kind of wanted to wrap up here with something kind of anime related. I don't even know why I watched it, but I did check out the American live-action adaptation of DeathNote. Now, a little bit of context here. DeathNote was one of the first manga I ever read, and the first manga that, I guess, other than Hellsing, I really liked back when I was like a teenager. And I still thought that it was pretty well written in terms of like a shonen thriller. It definitely upped the ante a bit, and it's definitely one of the most accessible anime and manga properties over here. Like, it's still pretty popular to this day, and obviously garnered enough attention to, you know, make a live action film through Netflix, which, you know, for the most part they've made pretty good things. You know, and as we know, there's kind of been a lot of controversy around a lot of these things, and, you know, Ghost of the Shell, you can even see the little thing back there when we went to see it. There's a little mini poster thing back there. You know, there's been a lot of mixed feelings about it. I don't think that good anime adaptations in live action in America or in general are possible, but I think they're hard to pull off. I actually feel like Death Note was one of those ones that I thought could have really worked, and I think that I know that originally it was supposed to be a series. I think HBO was supposed to do it, and then Netflix got it, and then they just made it a movie. Now, I'll start off by saying that I feel like the biggest issue here was that it was a movie. Because looking through it, the first real positive, and the biggest positive I can say when I'm watching the movie, is that it was actually very well shot. Like, in terms of the cinematography, the lighting, the editing, in a lot of spots, I mean, you could definitely tell, I'm not going to say it was consistent all the time, but you can definitely tell the directors of this were really experimenting with different things and things that they had observed, and you could see they were modeling things, and that's obvious, but it looked good. I thought a lot of it looked really good. In terms of the production, I thought it looked really good. I also thought that Ryuk Willem Dafoe playing Ryuk, the times we get to see him, he is awesome. Not quite in character, I think, but still pretty cool. He's not in it very much, which is like the main draw for a lot of people, but he was cool. I won't deny it. The voice acting was good. Makeup, prosthetics for him, awesome. Looks awesome. And that's where the major positives end, unfortunately. I think that as an adaptation, you can tell, and I've thought about this, even with Ghost in the Shell, or heck, I'll even go as far as to say Dragon Ball Evolution and the Fist of the North Star movie, or Speed Racer, these movies tend not to be very good, or at the very least very divisive, but you can definitely tell with a lot of these films that there are people that like the original source material and are trying to emulate things from it. Like, they have watched it. It's not like some of these things where, I guess Dragon Ball Evolution is a pretty good example, where it seems like they just missed the whole point. But in this one, like, you can see that they did try to get nuances, like for L's character, the way he was acting through a large part of it, emulating his sitting, his weird eating, his fidgeting, the way he spoke in this monotone, very restrained, logical way, like stuff like that. That was probably the best thing. You could tell that at least that actor was really trying his best. I thought he did a pretty good job. And I actually thought that the actor for Light did a pretty good job. I thought that the acting overall was pretty decent for this. They even had a couple of bigger actors in supporting roles. Okay, it was actually fairly well acted and fairly well shot, but there was still a lot of campiness though, and I think the biggest issue was that everything was rushed. Like, he kind of finds the Death Note, finds Ryuk, starts doing stuff, and if you didn't know anything about Death Note, if you knew nothing about it, I think you'd be really confused. Honestly, I think you'd be really confused about what's going on and how the rules work, because that's another thing. They did a really immaculate job of defining all the rules in the manga. And in the anime, they kind of do as well. But in this film, it seems like they don't really define it. They kind of make up stuff as they go along, and it gets confusing. And now, I could almost say that, alright, maybe the character of Light in this he's a different interpretation, he's a slightly different character. He's not as evil in this, honestly. I mean, if they're going for a different direction, they try to make him more sympathetic by giving him a more tragic backstory, for instance. They did try to do that, and that was one thing I definitely noticed. But in addition to that, they introduced the female character, the love interest, and that was incredibly rushed. That was so rushed. And then they essentially kind of made her the villain, and they played around with the rules, and then things just start to break down. I kind of thought, okay, they're kind of keeping it in line, but so much stuff happens so fast. You don't know how fast this has been. A couple days, weeks, months, and things just go by so fast. It's less than 2 hours. And it just never, I'll admit, it never feels like it slows down, so it never really gets boring, but it feels like you're just kind of trying to keep up, and it's just like, man, slow down for breath. And then they kind of waste some of that time. When I think what really broke down for me, I guess it was I kind of thought it was pretty bad pretty quickly into the movie, but when L completely loses character, because when his mentor, Guardian, gets killed, he completely loses it. And if you guys remember, even when he was scared, L never really lost his composure. But in this, he goes into a mad rage. He pulls out a gun, and he literally engages in Light with this chase scene. This chase scene which goes on for 5-10 minutes of the movie, and I don't remember any point in Death Note where there was ever a high suspense chase scene. It was just what am I watching? And it was just another instance where I felt like this movie was just trying to be a bunch of other different movies and taking so much influence in so many different directions. It was rough. It was really, really rough. So I think for characterization, they were really off with how they portrayed the characters. It felt really rushed, poorly defined. I mean, as an adaptation, it had elements that I thought were good. We were talking about this monologue at the end where he kind of summarize his whole plan of how he got out of it. Okay, that felt like a Death Note thing. We were talking about it with my buddy Tiefling, but then the movie was over. And there were pockets of that where you could see this feels a bit like the anime, feels a bit like the manga, but it's too wildly different in two other areas, and just overall not that well done. The acting was kind of sporadic, characters not well defined. The pacing was way too rushed, I think, to define anything, and the adding in certain elements like the whole love interest thing early on kind of takes away from the other character. I thought initially it was interesting, but even in and of itself, it wasn't really that well done, I think. But I mean, it was well shot, I thought, and I thought that the acting was kind of okay. And I thought that Ryuk was awesome in like the couple scenes he was in, but he was basically just evil, complete evil. He was not he wasn't the kind of neutral, chaotic person he typically is. He was just evil in this. But yeah, the Death Note movie kind of sucked. I feel like I don't know. I think. I don't want to say it's impossible. I mean, there have been a few instances of live-action adaptations that have been done well. I know that the Rurouni Kenshin movies apparently were really well done. I actually had a couple friends that got them for me, so I should probably sit down and let you guys know what to think about those. But that's one of the few I can think of. And even so, those are typically Japanese. I mean, they got the Fullmetal Alchemist one. But as far as American ones, I guess there just must be something really lost in translation, because it's an issue. And you can tell that there is some love for the original material there, and they are trying, but it's like there's not enough money or time or fine attention to detail that's consistent in any of these things. I mean, is Death Note the worst? I don't know if I could say that. I think some of the other ones are pretty bad, but it's definitely not good. It's definitely not good, but I had some high hopes for it. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much all I've got to talk about today. I've got a couple other things I could talk about in the future, but hopefully I'm going to be doing some podcasts and videos like these, with some friends of mine. Hopefully we'll start to get those up, typically every Wednesday. And I'm going to get some other videos. Look forward to a more focused discussion on a particular topic, probably coming up this Sunday. And hopefully that's going to be the consistent schedule. But if you guys have any suggestions or comments, feedback, possibilities for future reviews and things, please let me know in the comments below. And if you want to follow along, you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. Hit that little button there and check out some other videos if this one interested you. And I've got social media. I've got Facebook, Twitter, all that good stuff. I'll put that in the description below if you want to follow along. And that's going to be all I have to say today, guys. So until next time, I'll see you for another podcast. All right, everybody. Stay magical.